I am here to introduce Maria Segura and Mark Raphael. I said it right. Thank you. You guys come on up and have a seat. Do we have microphones for them? This doesn't come on. Okay. While she's getting a mic for you, if you can, I think the crowd is good. There you go. If you guys can introduce yourself and tell the group a little bit about who you work for and what you do.
No? Oh, there it goes.
Sorry about that. Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Raphael. I'm with the Raphael Insurance Group. We are a farmers insurance agency and an independent insurance agency. I've been in insurance about 10 years. My first year, I worked under a broker, did awful, learned the ropes, was about $15,000 in debt, and really questioned whether I was in the right industry. So, got the soul searching, and I called Farmers and said, what are my options? So 9 years ago, they said, we'll give you a loan if you want to try again and start your own office. So I decided, who's dumb enough to give a young guy in debt a loan? So I said, I have no choice. I'll try this again. So 9 years ago, I started an office with my wife, who is our office manager now. We tailored our entire operation around you, people in real estate. Decided to sponsor HAR, the Women's Council of Realtors, the Houston Apartment Association. In the first year in business, we got awarded Farmers Rookie of the Year. And we've acquired retiring agents due to our service. And today we service over 3,000 policies, not only in Texas, but in 6 other states. And we specialize in residential and commercial insurance. And we've been awarded one of the top farmers insurance agencies in the entire company. And I got asked to co-author a book with Brian Tracy in 2013 for kind of our story, so to speak. So I'm very happy to be here and happy to answer any questions. I'll toss the mic.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Maria Segura. I have been in the industry, in the insurance industry for 20 plus years. I worked for Liberty Mutual as a captive agent for 20 years. And quite honestly, I thought I was going to retire there. I thought I was going to give them another 5 years and enjoy retirement life. Well, things started to shift, and I knew I needed to make a change. At that time, I actually called Allstate and asked them, what do they have to offer? And along the way, I found this franchise with Goosehead Insurance and decided to go work as a broker instead. And I took my retirement and purchased this franchise. I started with one agent, Charles Villafana, that many of you know. Later brought on a second agent, Claudia Hoffman, and we have now been in business for just 2 years. Working our way up, I decided to set myself apart and join a lot of the Hispanic organizations and just, organizations, again, in real estate and in the mortgage business. So I am now a board member with NAREP, the National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals. And I'm always looking for opportunities to work with the different organizations around us. HAR, I greatly appreciate the opportunity of them inviting me to be here with you today and answer any questions that you have.
So the way we're going to do this part of the program is we have 4 questions that we're going to ask, and if time permits, then we'll open it up to the audience for any additional questions. Does that work for both of you? Okay, so the first question is, what is the best type of insurance to purchase to protect someone from flood and water damage?
Okay, so flood insurance, let's start with that. There's flood insurance and there's water damage. Flood insurance only covers rising water. So it's very important to know the difference between what rising water is versus, if it has to be complete rising water of rainwater into your home and other homes around in your area. If it is water that has come in through sewer backup or any additional pipe that burst throughout the storm or what have you, that is not going to be covered under flood. Then it is very important to look at your home policies. About 15 years ago, the home insurance business here in Texas changed quite a bit. It used to be that we all had the same policy. It didn't matter who you went with, everybody had the same policy. Now there's a broad range of policies. Very important to talk to your agents and know what water damages are covered under your water policy, because not everything is going to be under the flood policy.
Great point. I do want to, it's the gray area, right? So a lot of people, I'm fortunate enough to know commercial insurance and residential insurance. So for those people that are renting a first floor apartment or renting a house or have an office in a strip center, many of them did not know what content-only flood insurance existed. The sewer drainage and backup. What happens if you're the only house on the block that floods? City water backs up. That is an endorsement. An endorsement is something that is added. We add that to every possible policy that will allow us. Now, Maria had mentioned there are a wide spectrum of policies. Let's start with a home policy. There is something referenced as an HOB, a broad policy, and then something referenced as an HO3. It's not as broad, meaning you catch a water leak, it's been a couple of weeks, the broad policy will cover it. The HO3 policy will say you didn't catch that in time, we're not covering it. So I encourage you to make sure that you have HOB policies, and there is a difference between carriers, meaning there are some that are admitted, that means backed by the government, and then there's some that are not admitted, which is not backed by the government. What does that mean? Let's say the storm actually hit, and we have shingles flying, and you have homes that are water damage from the top down is going to be covered basically on your homeowner's insurance or commercial insurance. If the insurance company bellies up because they were the lowest in town, you never heard of them, then they won't pay. But an admitted policy, if they do run out of reserves, the government has an obligation to step in and make sure claims are paid. That happened up north whenever we had the floods in Rhode Island. And so I encourage you to make sure that to have an HOB policy. And then I also want to reference excess flood. Most people understand that you can get up to $250,000 in flood coverage on your property and $100,000 on your content, the things inside. The government is not an insurance company, mind you. There are some things excluded, like your additional living expenses, staying in a hotel. That was the tough pill to swallow. But let's say you live in $1 million house. There is something called excess flood that goes above the $250,000. And most people are not aware of that because FEMA stops at $250,000. There are third-party insurance companies that will insure above that. Many clients are not aware of that, so as agents, we make it our responsibility to mention getting a broad policy, having the sewer drainage and backup endorsement, and of course, having either flood insurance on your property and contents, or just having content only if you're renting. Hope that helps.
Okay, great, yeah, great answers. So how does the claim process work? You both represent two different types of agencies. What is the claim process? What should it look like?
Sure. So in this case, there's no typical time frame. What most people experience is my adjuster came in, took a quick look, and left. Well, it made people feel kind of like they weren't getting taken care of. When you have this type of storm, basically adjusters come in to do a quick reference, and when you call to make your claim, right away call the insurance company, make a claim, get it in the books, and be sure to dispose of the things that could cause damage, but don't throw things away. Take before and after pictures. Keep samples if you do throw things away. On average, an adjuster will be in touch within 1 to 3 business days. However, that's the first look, and then another adjuster will come out. And it seems kind of convoluted, but believe it or not, sometimes they have 2 different adjusters on the same claim. One for the building and one for the contents. And then they will report that to home office. And usually, I'll take an example. I contacted an employee of the National Flood Services here in Houston. Their claim took 2 months. It just depends on the workload of the adjusters. So if it was a flood that happened or a storm that happened just in one area, you're going to have a quicker response time. The reality is there's really no true time frame when it's a disaster like this. When Florida got hit, many of the adjusters, by the way, they are third-party adjusters when cases like this happen. So you might feel like, hey, the insurance company is not taking care of me. These are third-party adjusters, and when Florida had their storm, many companies called them and said, we'll pay you more to come out here. So we lost a lot of our adjusters. So it really depends on the scenario, but I encourage you to file the claim as quickly as possible, take before and after pictures, and try to be patient and keep touch with your adjuster.
And just like you said, this is also a gray area, and it depends, different carriers, different processes, but always call them immediately. If we know the storm is coming, try to get these policies, get your policy number. If you can't take the copy of the policy with you, at least have the policy number with you. That's definitely helpful. The more information you have for the adjusters, when you call in, when they come out to your home, the quicker of response that you're going to have. The more pictures that you have, and people think, okay, well, they try to rush to take pictures right as things are happening. But keep in mind, guys, especially today with so much social media that we have today, you'd be surprised how many pictures of your items you have that you don't realize. I mean, utilize those. You get as much as you can, and never, ever, ever throw anything away. I've had in the past with Hurricane Ike, for example, even going back to that, where people started getting impatient because it is a huge natural disaster. So, like you said, we have third-party adjusters, then we do lose them as storms are going on in other states and so forth. So I had clients that started getting impatient and started to do their own work, and then thought that they would be reimbursed. That just is not true. You go get that fixed, you got rid of everything, there is nothing for them to adjust. So really, that's the thing. If there's nothing for them to look at, nothing for them to take, they have nothing to go by, so there's no way that they could reimburse you for that. So be patient, stay in contact with your adjusters, call your agents if need be. And a very important thing to remember, he talked about the access flood. Most people have the FEMA policies, the standard policies that are the maximum $250,000 on the dwelling, $100,000 on contents. Contents is not covered at replacement value. A lot of people don't realize that, and that is huge. So if you can purchase an access flood, definitely, by all means, we want to go that route.
Okay, and then our final question, because you kind of blended those two questions together, so that was good. I think a lot of good information. And then the last question is, what kind of questions should a homeowner ask when making a claim? So initially when making a claim, what kind of questions and information should they have?
Sure. So I always make sure to ask, what should I keep and what should I throw away? Once the church communities came in and started helping and put a lot of things in the front of the yard, and things got picked up, many people kind of felt helpless when it was all gone. So I would encourage you to ask the adjuster what to keep and what not to keep. Sometimes, the moldy carpet, they'll say get rid of, but keep a sample. So that's what I would do. I would make sure you contact the adjuster. And mind you, when you make the initial call, that person that you're talking to on the other side, they're essentially a clerk. They're not an adjuster. So take that with a grain of salt, get the claim in, and then when the adjuster comes out, I would ask him what to keep and what to dispose of.
And the same thing, as you're making these calls, like he said, you're going to more than likely be speaking to a clerk. So make sure you get all of the detailed information for the actual adjuster. Name, phone number, email, what is the best method to contact them, and ask them for a time frame. Ask them to give you an estimated time frame, and that definitely would help you as well.
And I just want to piggyback on one thing. I'm sure everybody here, you can raise your hand. Who's heard of being in a 100-year flood zone or a 500-year flood zone? Everybody. So, if the saying is right, we're not going to see another Harvey for 1,000 years, right? Well, the reality is, all that means is it's a percentage. 100 years means you have a 1% chance of flooding. If you're in a 500 year, 0.05, and so on. However, we tend to have multiple floods in 1 year. And the way Houston is being constructed, being, you know, we're flat and we have tropical storms, and we're putting more concrete, and water's figuring out where to go. So don't take that with a grain of salt. If you live in Houston, it's really the biggest exclusion you can have. I encourage all of you to talk to your agent and obtain flood insurance.
Yes, and like he was saying, they are also referred to as preferred flood areas. Or I have agents call me and ask me, can you tell me if this house is in a flood zone? Everybody is in a flood zone. It's just a matter of what flood zone are we in. Zone X is the preferred one, so you can purchase the preferred flood policy. One thing that a lot of people don't realize is, and you as real estate agents can help your clients, there's been a lot of rezoning in the Houston area. So let's say that your seller was in an area that was in a preferred flood zone area, Zone X, but they have since been rezoned and are now in a high-risk area, which requires a lot more legwork to obtain the policy, and those policies are quite a bit more expensive. Well, the seller can, the seller has a preferred flood policy already, and now their property is in a high-risk area, they can transfer that policy to the new buyer, okay? It is something that can be worked out between the seller and the buyer, because the policy will remain the same policy until renewal. So if the seller wants to be reimbursed for the prorated amount, you know, they can do that. Again, it'll be worked out between the seller and the buyer. Another negotiation area that you can help cover. And if you need any more information on that, I'm sure either Mark or myself would be more than happy to assist you with that.
Okay. Do you have anything else?
Well, I actually have a kind of few bullet points we can talk about what is covered and what is not covered, and I'll run through it real briefly. So on the building, we will insure the building and its foundation, the electrical and plumbing systems, the air condition, furnaces and heaters, refrigerators, stoves, permanently installed carpeting and unfinished flooring, paneling, bookcases, window blinds, detached garage. Here's up to 10% of the building value. Now, if you have a separate building on your land, it needs to be a separate flood policy. Most people are not aware of that. And it does cover debris removal. Now, on your personal property, clothing, furniture, electrical equipment, curtains, air conditioners, clothing, washer, dryers, food in the freezer, but not food in the refrigerator. Okay? And what is not covered? Now, here, damage caused by moisture, mildew, or mold that could have been avoided by the property owner. Keep that in mind. Currency, precious metals, valuable papers such as stock certificates. And, of course, financial losses and additional living expenses are not covered. So keep all those in mind, and things outside of the home, like your landscaping, your decks, your patios, your fencing, hot tubs, and swimming pools are not covered on flood insurance, but may be covered on your home policy. Other than that, guys, I hope that you learned something, and if you have any questions, I'm sure you can pull me or Maria aside.
Right. All right. Thank you both very much. So is Tish? Yes. Okay. So we do have, you have a few minutes?
Sure,
Okay.
sure.
So we have 5 minutes for question and answers. Does anybody have a question? Yes, sir.
Hi, Darren Morris here. I've got a listing in Ireland, and I've got a listing in Meyerland, and I was just talking to her this morning about this. It was flooded out, and she doesn't know what the min insurance that's recommended on that house, because she's obviously got to have some liability insurance in case someone gets hurt there. Is there more than that you would recommend, or is that enough?
So is this right now during the course of construction?
She's not going to renovate.
Okay, so it's vacant.
It's vacant. Yeah.
Okay, so if you talk to any, let's say she just left her policy in force and didn't say anything, she would have a rude awakening if place caught on fire, something happened. So as soon as the home is vacant for more than 30 days or nobody's in there, that home policy has some fine print that says we don't insure vacant homes. So what I suggest is you can get what we call a vacant dwelling policy. And you can do that even in 1, 2, 3 month increments until the house is sold. You don't have to necessarily do a 12-month policy. So I encourage, if the house is vacant, you do a vacant dwelling policy. If you are doing renovations, made like above 30%, and it's going to take some time, the policy that is appropriate is called builder's risk. It's insurance during the course of construction.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Yes, ma'am.
So a question about loss of use coverage. My mother experienced damage from Harvey, and she has an all-state policy. The loss of, she did not have flood insurance. She was not in a flood zone, et cetera, you know, story for many. But the, basically the insurance, in my opinion, just my opinion, sort of weaseled out of it on a technicality. But regarding loss of use, they said if she was under a mandatory evacuation, they said if that mandatory evacuation in her area had been issued because of the hurricane, they would have had coverage. She would have had coverage under loss of use. But the mandatory evacuation was issued over rising flood water, hence they got out of it. So moving forward, how do I educate, you know, not just family members, but clients regarding loss of use?
So, and she did have a flood, she was flooded, or she was not?
She was flooded.
She was
yes.
flooded. So the only way that she would have had loss of use coverage in that event is if she had a flood policy through the Access flood coverage. So in other words, it's a private flood company, and not everybody offers that. But yes, other than that, flood, let's just say that she had your regular FEMA flood policy, which most people do. Then loss of use is not covered on that, unfortunately. And the only thing that you can fall back on then is the emergency money that FEMA themselves give you. If you have the private flood policy or through the Access flood, then she would have the loss of use.
All right, we have one last
Or
question
did
in
you
the
have
back.
something else on that?
Yes, Gibran Hernandez, White Picket Realty. I just had a real quick question, if you could tell us a little bit about commercial policies, because I know, for example, we got flooded during the flood, but it didn't cause the electrical damage to our building. And so then they came in and they said, okay, well, yeah, you had electrical damage because of a power surge. But then they determined that the power surge was caused by a flooding at the substation. So then they said, well, no, we're not going to cover it because it was ultimately caused by a flood. And to us, that was kind of sneaky way to get out of it, because the flood had nothing to do with our electrical damage, but they got out of it because the electrical damage was ultimately caused by flood. So what questions should we be asking? Because a lot of us are business owners, we have office locations, and if we had known the right questions to ask from the beginning, I feel like we wouldn't be in that situation.
Great question. So so you have your commercial insurance and you have flood insurance. Your commercial insurance typically has something called business interruption. If a covered claim causes you not to be able to work, then you could retrieve the lost revenues of the company. Now, there is an endorsement also that will cover what we, let's say you're the only business on the block that lost electricity for 3 months due to the power outage down the block, and you're not able to operate. The business insurance should cover it. It's called time utility coverage. And I had mentioned earlier there's admitted and non-admitted companies. Usually the admitted are going to be the companies that you know that adds those bells and whistles. Sometimes when you go with these non-admitted carriers, they don't offer that coverage. So it's kind of a gray area, to be honest with you. So I would say look for business interruption, and if the not having electricity would be able to recoup the lost revenue. No, I've had companies that it was flooded around their block, but nothing happened, and they try to claim lost income, but there was no physical damage or the electricity. When they checked with CenterPoint, it says, hey, you had electricity the whole time. So if CenterPoint said you lost electricity for 10 days, then that would be proof to take to the insurance company and say, I wasn't able to operate. Do I qualify for business interruption? And just so you're aware, just like we have a standard flood policy for residential, for commercial, you can get, for many people that own strip centers or own and operate their office building, you could obtain up to $500,000 in coverage for your commercial property and $250,000 in contents, and the premium is only $2,500 a year. So when we talk about being, I know we said, oh, we're not in a flood zone, so I just want to reiterate something. So we all hear, lenders, realtors, even insurance agents say you aren't in a flood zone. The truth is, there are 3 problems with that. They are in a flood zone, they may need insurance, and that statement can be construed as advice from a non-insurance professional rather than a comment. So I want to keep everybody safe from lawsuits, and I want to urge you guys to stay away from saying you're not in a flood zone. We're all in a flood zone, and I want to keep you out of the courtroom.
Thank you both very much.
My pleasure.